Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. Today I'm discussing the case of Sophie Reeder. Shortly after 2 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, May 20th, 2017, a security camera along Davie Boulevard recorded a girl walking east through Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Her brown, curly hair is gathered into two buns. It looks like she's wearing a short black dress, a brown faux fur coat, red high-top sneakers, and white headphones. This is 15-year-old Sophie Reeder, and these are the last images we have of her. Then, Sophie headed east and disappeared from the camera's view. This is the case of Sophie Reeder. Friday, May 19th, 2017 started as just any other day in the Reeder home. They live on Citrus Isle. It's a quiet waterfront street in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And 15-year-old Sophie was working with these artificial flowers, gluing and attaching them to things in her room and using them in pictures. She loved arts and crafts. She even convinced her dad, Patrick Reeder, to stick one behind his ear for a selfie. It really is this beautiful image, but like any family, they had their struggles. Sophie, who'd been living with him full-time since she was 12, was struggling with depression and anxiety. She'd been hanging out with a bad crowd and having trouble in school, so just a few months prior, she transferred to an online high school. Of course, this did lead her to becoming more isolated from people and spending a lot more time alone on her computer. Understandably, this did concern her family, but it seemed like things were taking a positive turn. The night before, she just randomly decided she wanted to cook a meal for herself, her father, and his girlfriend. It was a simple chicken dish. But to some, it was a sign that things were getting better. So the next night, Friday, everything seemed fine. But around 11, Patrick saw Sophie pacing around the house with her phone and told her to go to bed. Sophie didn't argue. She said okay, and she went to her room. But then she sneaks out of the house without telling her dad. After this, Sophie's captured on a neighborhood surveillance camera near her home at 11:25 p.m. It's a pretty rough and grainy video, but you can see that she's alone and that it's definitely Sophie Reeder. Now, her street, Citrus Isle, is a dead-end residential street surrounded by canals, so there's only one way out. Basically, the streets in this neighborhood are like their own little islands with each side surrounded by water. So we can assume that she heads east, then probably turns left onto Southwest 9th Avenue to the larger main road, Davie Boulevard, where she eventually makes a right and heads east again. But I say probably because there's a problem with this timeline. We have a large gap of time before Sophie's seen again. At 2:16 a.m. on now Saturday, May 20th, Sophie's seen again on surveillance video now on Davie Boulevard, about 1 mile from her home. This video is much clearer. It looks like she's wearing a short black dress, or at least a black shirt-skirt combo, a brown faux fur coat, red high-top sneakers, and white over-the-ear wired headphones. Again, she's alone in both videos that we have, and she's walking at a normal pace. Really, to me, it looks like she's just taking a casual walk. So we have this great, really clear image of Sophie, but of course the question is, what was she doing for nearly 3 hours? She was seen in her neighborhood at 11:25 p.m., and now, nearly 3 hours later, she's seen about a mile away at 2:16 a.m. Well, what we do know is that at 3:07 a.m., records show an outbound call from Sophie's phone to 37-year-old Leonard Jennings. This call was made as her phone arrived at the apartment complex at 1725 Southwest 11 Court. This is where Jennings was staying with his family. It's about 2 miles from Sophie's home. Now, we don't have to infer anything here. Police have said outright that they believe Sophie was inside of his apartment, and her phone continues to show that she's there, or at least that her phone is there until 9:13 a.m. Then it goes silent. Back on Citrus Isle, Saturday morning began with a closed bedroom door. Patrick later said that he assumed that Sophie was sleeping. It was a weekend, and nothing about a teenager sleeping late raised any red flags for him. So he leaves to go run errands. But at some point, he does text Sophie to check in, and he never gets a reply. When Patrick gets home, Sophie's door is still closed. When he goes inside, he sees that a candle was still burning, and nothing really seemed to be missing. But he also finds something else, something strange. He finds about $300 in crumpled $1 bills inside a bag near her bed. Now again, Sophie's 15 and she doesn't have a job, not even some type of under-the-table side hustle, so Patrick has no idea how she got that money. And there's another clue on the wall. May 19th had been marked with a large X on Sophie's calendar. Now Patrick is panicking. He begins calling family. He checked in with Sophie's mother, Nicole Twist. He called relatives who might have seen her, but no one had. And unfortunately, Patrick was under the impression that he had to wait 48 hours before police would take a report. But that doesn't mean that he didn't take action immediately. That entire weekend, Patrick and other family members searched the area for Sophie themselves. And then finally, on Monday morning, May 22nd, Patrick went to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department to report Sophie missing.
Amazon Health AI presents Painful Thoughts.
Why did I search the internet for answers to my cold sore problem? Now I'm stuck down a rabbit hole filled with images of alarmingly graphic sores in various stages of ooze. I can clear my search history, but I can never unsee that.
Don't go down the rabbit hole. Amazon Health AI gets you the right care, fast. Healthcare just got less painful.
On Monday, May 22, 2017, 15-year-old Sophie Reeder had been missing for 2 days when her father reports her missing to the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. And you guys, what do they tell him? She's a teenage girl. She'll be back in a week. The response I think we all dread when learning about cases of missing children. But luckily, despite this response, it seems that someone in this department understood the urgency, because they do begin investigating at this point. They start canvassing the neighborhood, and they search Sophie's room. This is when they and Sophie's family finds out that she had 2 cell phones. The one she took with her and that was used to call 37-year-old Leonard Jennings, and the one that's been left behind in her room. Unfortunately, the police haven't really spelled this out for us. We don't know which phone was paid for by presumably her parents and which was the additional phone. We just know that Patrick had no idea about this second phone. They also find her diary, and what's written inside is terrifying. First, they find the phone number for Leonard Jennings. Second, they see that Sophie wrote that she was lonely and felt unwanted. And finally, they see that she wrote down a goal to get 10 sugar daddies. Obviously, this is a scary situation, but at this point, investigators are still leaning towards the theory that Sophie left and was still away by choice. And unfortunately, for some reason, they don't even go through Sophie's computer, but her family does. They find that she's been visiting these sugar daddy websites, so Patrick brings this information to police himself. Of course, their best lead right now is 37-year-old Leonard Jennings. Sophie wrote about him in her diary. It's her last known location, or at least the location of her phone, and on that second phone they found, there were only 12 contacts. And you guessed it, Jennings was one of them. Not only that, he was the second most called person in that phone, just below her dad. So for obvious reasons, all eyes are on Jennings. So let's talk a bit about him. Like I told you earlier, the apartment wasn't actually his. He was staying with his family, his mom and 2 brothers. Now, in addition to being more than twice Sophie's age, he is a convicted felon with more than 24 felony charges on his record, including assault. So investigators go to Sophie's friends to see if they know anything about Jennings, and luckily they do. According to reporting by Brittany Wallman for the Sun-Sentinel, one of Sophie's friends said that she would buy weed from Jennings. Another friend said that it wasn't just Leonard Jennings that Sophie knew, but also his nephew, 28-year-old Christopher Jennings, who was known by the nickname Goonie Goon, and was often around the apartment complex. But according to that reporting by the Sun-Sentinel, Leonard and his brother Jeremiah denied seeing, communicating with, or knowing Sophie at all. Leonard later told reporter Brittany Wallman that police had searched the home and questioned him, but he didn't know what happened to Sophie. His mom, Ora Jennings, also said that she'd never seen Sophie. But let's take a second to talk about that search. Investigators get Sophie's phone records about 2 weeks after she goes missing. So 2 weeks in, they know all about Jennings, the phone call, and her phone last being at the apartment complex. But it takes about another month or so to get a search warrant for his home. The only real explanation we have for this is Sergeant John Geiger saying that the phone data was not precise enough, by itself, that Sophie had entered that particular residence. But it seems that eventually they get enough to have a judge sign off on a search warrant on July 12, 2017, exactly 53 days after Sophie disappeared. The warrant identified kidnapping, human trafficking, and murder as possible offenses under investigation. During the search, police seized a large collection of electronics and other property, including 25 cell phones, a camera, 2 media players, headphones, 2 computer towers, a hard drive, a journal, live ammunition, and a wig. Anthony Jennings, again one of Leonard's brothers, was arrested during the operation on an unrelated warrant. But in the end, investigators said that none of the items seized had been connected to Sophie. Out of all 25 cell phones, none were Sophie's. Now, of course, searches for Sophie did expand beyond that apartment. Divers examined the canals near Sophie's home. Cadaver dogs searched a wooded area near her phone's last known location, but there was just no trace of Sophie. By the end of the first year, police had accumulated an amazing amount of evidence, and none of it leads them to Sophie. But it does lead them to someone else. Another adult man living in Jennings' apartment complex. This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Hers. If you've tried everything to lose weight and still feel stuck, this summer can be different. Weight Loss by Hers is designed to support you in reaching your goals, and they now offer access to the FDA-approved Wegovy pill and Wegovy pen. You'll connect with a licensed provider who will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your medication is delivered right to your door, no insurance necessary. And it doesn't stop there. Weight Loss by Hers goes beyond medication by offering access to 24/7 messaging with your care team. They also have a ton of in-app lifestyle and nutrition tips, like recipes, meal plans, fitness videos, sleep content, and more. Ready to reach your goals? Visit forhers.com/crime to get personalized, affordable care that gets you. That's forhers.com/crime. forhers.com/crime. Weight Loss by Hers is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restrictions, visit forhers.com. 41-year-old John Mobley enters Sophie Reeder's story through a web of relationships investigators were trying to understand. Police records showed that Sophie's final known call, or at least the last call from her cell phone, was made at 3:07 a.m. and went to Leonard Jennings. This was just as the phone was arriving at the apartment complex. But later, they learned that 3 days after Sophie went missing, at 5:17 a.m. on May 23rd, Jennings called a neighbor whom police suspected was involved in sex trafficking. Of course, that's John Mobley. Not only that, but according to reporting by the show In Pursuit with John Walsh, both Jennings and Mobley were mentioned in Sophie's diary. Now, during the initial search for Sophie, officers did knock on Mobley's door while they were handing out missing person flyers. According to the police, he opened the door but became uncooperative when they mentioned Sophie. At that point, he ended the conversation. But in September 2018, about a year and a half after Sophie goes missing, investigators have a unique opportunity. By this time, both the Jennings family and John Mobley had moved out of their apartments, and both were vacant. So they do another search, this time of both apartments, and this time really looking for a crime scene. They search, they pull up carpet, they use luminol, but they find nothing. No trace of Sophie, no trace of any possible crime scene. And really, that's where the story of John Mobley ends. He's never actually had any convictions related to sex trafficking. In fact, Sergeant Geiger told Dateline that while Mobley did have an extensive criminal record, they'd only heard rumors that he may be involved in sex trafficking. And apparently none of his convictions are actually tied to that. However, it does still seem like there's good evidence pointing to the idea that Sophie might have been sex trafficked. Another friend of Sophie's spoke with the Sun-Sentinel, saying they discussed how much Sophie might charge a man for sex. And while a few of Sophie's friends have said that they really thought she was just kidding when discussing getting sugar daddies and other things like this, she also told them something heartbreaking. Sophie said that she'd been sexually assaulted by an adult man in a hotel room. So while there's no police report about that and we really don't know anything else, if this is true, it seems possible that Sophie might have tried this once. But in the end, Geiger said that Sophie's account showed no posts, no messages received, and no evidence that she met anyone online. The Fort Lauderdale police said outright that it found nothing indicating that she was trafficked. And by 2025, Geiger stated directly that he didn't believe trafficking was the explanation, although he did say that foul play was likely. So what theories does the evidence actually support in this case? First, and perhaps the strongest theory about Sophie's intent, is that she planned a short walk or meeting and expected to return. The burning candle, the cash, the fact that nothing seemed to be really missing from her room. Nothing about this points to a child who planned to leave forever. But that late-night route, that 3:07 a.m. call, and her phone's concentration near one apartment complex does point to a destination or a contact. I think a very strong possibility here is that Sophie was feeling anxious and began pacing around her home. When her father told her to go to bed, she still wasn't able to calm her thoughts, so she went for a walk around her neighborhood. She's seen on camera at 11:25 p.m. near her home, and maybe during this time gap, she's just walking with her headphones on. Something both of Sophie's parents have said is that music is a coping mechanism for her. In fact, Patrick would often take late drives with Sophie just to listen to music. So maybe the only real plan was to walk around listening to music. Of course, this is just a theory, but I do think it would explain the large gap of time before she's seen on surveillance again at 2:16 a.m. on Davie Boulevard. I think it's possible that after a few hours of walking, Sophie decides she wants to smoke some weed. So she walks the about 2 miles to Jennings' apartment, gives him a call at 3:07 a.m., and then something happens that keeps her or just her phone at the apartment complex. Whether that was Jennings, Mobley, or someone else who makes that happen is unclear. I think it's important to note here that while the Jennings family has basically denied any relationship with Sophie, her friends paint a very different picture. And at that age, in that type of environment, smoking weed, maybe drinking a bit, you sometimes get to know other people at these apartment complexes, which I think opens the door to a lot of possibilities here. Maybe Sophie did go into the Jennings apartment. Maybe she went into John Mobley's apartment. Maybe someone else robbed her, took her phone, and did something awful to her. Of course, while all signs don't point to one person, they do point to one location. Now, another theory is that Sophie suffered an accidental overdose and someone concealed her death. Sergeant Geiger has discussed this possibility in the Dateline coverage. He acknowledged that he had no proof, but he reasoned that if Sophie died accidentally in the company of people who were involved with drugs, those people may have panicked and disposed of her remains. He suggested the canals or other concealed locations as possibilities, but of course, there's nothing concrete to point to that theory either, not even a single witness. We have to consider homicide, abduction, or another act of foul play connected to either the complex or someone she encountered along the way. But again, no witness saw an abduction. No assault scene has been identified. No blood or DNA has been announced in this case. I think we also have to consider the X on Sophie's calendar for this exact date, May 19th, 2017. It's something I can't just not come back to in this episode. The trouble is, we just have no idea what it means. Most nefarious, maybe she was planning to meet up with an adult who planned to harm her. But really, it could be anything. It could be when she expected her next period, a deadline for school, some type of personal goal she was trying to meet. It could mean everything in this case, or it could mean absolutely nothing. For now, it just sits. I think the last theories to explore are an accident, self-harm, or leaving voluntarily. Now, we know that Sophie experienced symptoms of depression, anxiety, thoughts of self-harm, cutting, mood swings, school absences, and a previous episode where she left home and returned the following day. Patrick also said that Sophie had been prescribed medication but stopped taking it. These are all things we need to take into consideration. But also, investigators have made it clear that they suspect foul play. So while I do think it's important to consider, I don't think it ranks among their top theories. And now, years have passed without a verified sighting. Authenticated communication, a known financial trail, identity use, or any type of public digital footprint. Sophie left almost everything behind, including a good amount of cash. Then her phone went dark. That prior one-day episode doesn't explain nearly a decade of silence at this point. And I think the vast amount of theories in Sophie's case may explain why in 2025 and 2026, the investigation took an unconventional turn. Investigators turned to psychics. One first approached Sophie's family and offered services without charge. Information from that person prompted police to search a canal and the surrounding area. But nothing was found. In the summer of 2026, the department retained Alejandra Taborn. She describes herself as a psychic profiler and medium. Police paid $1,500 for a 90-day consultation, and really all we know is that a department spokesperson said that detectives were evaluating the information as they would other tips. But we do know that Sophie's family wasn't really thrilled about this. Patrick said he would welcome a result, but questioned why the money wasn't being used for conventional work or a larger reward. And some have speculated that the department did this to just look like they were doing something in the case given the recent media coverage. Either way, these efforts didn't seem to produce anything concrete to tell us what happened to Sophie. Almost a decade later, we're really left with the same facts. At 11:25 p.m. on May 19, 2017, Sophie was in her neighborhood. At 2:16 a.m. on now May 20th, Sophie was on Davie Boulevard. At 3:07 a.m., her phone called a number for Leonard Jennings. Until 9:13 a.m., the device remained detectable near Southwest 11th Court. Then, there's just nothing.
Evening. Buyer's remorse. Buy a new car? I'll be moving in. Let's get started.
Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I bought it from Carvana.
You what?
Yeah, great price. I even have 7 days to love it or return it.
So there's no...
No buyer's remorse. More like buyer's rejoice.
I guess I'll let myself out. Congratulations. I mean it.
Buyer's rejoice. Buy your car today on Carvana.
Limitations and exclusions may apply. See our 7-day return policy at Carvana.com.
When someone passes away, the people who love them confront an answer they never wanted. When someone disappears, the answer itself is missing. Sophie's family has lived for more than 9 years in that unresolved space, and they've really had to imagine mutually exclusive futures at the same time. Sophie could be alive and unable to call. She could be alive and afraid. She could have passed away hours after leaving home. She could have been hidden nearby, taken far away, or known by someone who spent years saying nothing. At the first anniversary, Her mom, Nicole, told CBS Miami that the not knowing was the worst part, that she searched social media for signs of an older Sophie, but never found her daughter. Nicole's public message to Sophie has remained unconditional. Whatever happened, whatever Sophie endured, she could come back home and be loved. As for her dad, Patrick, well, he kept Sophie's room just the way it was when she left. It's very pink. The calendar with an X on May 19th, 2017 is still there, as is the candle she left burning, waiting for her to return. Patrick told CNN that for years he couldn't sleep in his own bed. Instead, he slept on a couch near the door, waiting for Sophie to come home. He said he wants the truth even if the truth is devastating. He also said that he's holding out hope that he'll find his daughter alive. Now, Sophie's aunt, Kirsten Reeder Milhorn, gradually became one of the family's most visible advocates. She's a public school teacher in Virginia, and she said that while she was examining Sophie's case more closely, she assumed that a missing child would automatically trigger every effort available. Instead, she believes that they reduced Sophie to a runaway and that the system failed her. So like we see with so many of these families, she wanted to find a way to help other children, especially children of color and kids with complicated histories like Sophie. So in 2026, she turned one of the objects left in Sophie's room into a prevention project. Kirsten founded Sophie's Light Foundation using, in part, the about $300 found in Sophie's room. They're developing school-based online safety education. The goal is to help children recognize grooming language, understand digital boundaries, and tell a trusted adult when interaction feels wrong. Sophie's Light says it hopes to reach 100,000 children by 2029. Of course, Sophie's Light doesn't solve her case, but it does continue her legacy and give her loved ones an outlet to turn their grief into prevention for other children like Sophie. Which brings me right to our call to action. There are a few ways you can support Sophie's case and her family's efforts. Her family has a Facebook page called Looking for Sophie, where they share details about the case as well as information about the nonprofit. The organization also has an official Instagram page, Sophie's Light Foundation. Following, liking, or sharing these social media pages may seem small, but it's a really important way to let her family know that they're not alone in this search. And of course, to share Sophie's case to people who may not have heard of it. As always, I'll have links in this episode's description. In the end, we don't know what happened to Sophie Reeder, but we do know that her absence has left a huge hole in her family that can never be filled. So please take a second to share her case in hopes that her family can get the answers they've been waiting so long for. As a reminder, 15-year-old Sophie Reeder was last seen on May 20th, 2017 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She is biracial, black and white, with brown hair and brown eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was 5'1" and weighed about 100 pounds. At that time, Sophie's hair was shoulder length and curly. Her ears are pierced. As of recording this episode, she would now be 24 years old. Anyone with information about Sophie's disappearance is asked to call the Fort Lauderdale Police Department at 954-828-5700. There is a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to her recovery. But, as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney, and is a Voices for Justice media original. This episode contains writing and research assistance by Jessica Quaz. If you love what we do here, please don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show in your podcast player. It's a free and easy way to help more people find these cases in need of justice. Welcome to the Secret After Show. The studio door is open, and our emotional support puppies, Popcorn and Heber, are in the room. Let's go right into the case. The first thing I have on my list here is this 48-hour waiting rule needs to be banned from all verbiage across the universe. It is scary how many people believe this. And I don't really blame Patrick, you know what I mean? This is such a common misconception that it just drives me insane. And I pulled up a little information here because I'm not going to stop saying it because people still believe this. So the federal guidance is explicit, you guys. A law enforcement agency is required to enter a missing child into the National Crime Information Center without delay. And the Justice Department tells families that there is no waiting period for a child under 18. Tell your friends, tell everybody you know, because I never want to see this again. The next thing I have on my list is that X on Sophie's calendar. I don't know, you guys. I'm torn. Like I said, it could mean everything or it could mean nothing. I could see, especially a teenage girl, marking their period that way so their dad doesn't know or whatever. But it could also be, obviously, some type of cryptic, language to meet some horrible dude who's going to prey upon her. So, it's one of those things that I just want to, shake somebody and get the information. Also, it's really crazy to me that we don't have more in this case because there's no way that the police don't have more. I think that they're just not sharing it, which is fine. I get it. It just leaves me wondering so much, especially about this phone, right? The two phones. Why are there two phones? Where did the other one come from? Is it a burner phone? What's the model of phone, right? I have a million questions about these phones. Also about them at the apartment, right? That phone entered that area of that apartment complex, stayed there, and then was just gone. Between the X on the calendar and the phone, this feels very solvable if we could just figure these things out. And again, I have to hold out hope. I have a strong belief that it's very likely that the police know a lot more than they're telling us. Now let's go into media discrepancies because I am annoyed with the coverage in this case. There was a lot that made this really hard to really pin down. I mean, eventually you get it straight, right? But what I do when I'm researching these cases is I get a news article and then I fill out, my research document and it's okay, Sophie left home at 11 p.m. And then what I do is put the source in there, right? And then I go to the next source and it says Sophie left home at 10 p.m. And so I put that in the notes and I put the source there. So it's just eventually you get to the right answer, but the amount of bad reporting in this case is driving me insane. So let me tell you. In 2025, NBC said that the video of Sophie was around 11 p.m. CNN said that it was close to 11:30. Mind you, guys, we have the video, and it says 11:25 clearly. A later official reward flyer said that Sophie left her home around 12:45 a.m. And you guys, the original Fort Lauderdale police release said that she was last seen walking away at 10 p.m. on May 19th. So, I can't really blame the media when police are all over the place. But it's just when you have a missing child, it is so important to get that timeline right and to put this information out correctly. How is there an official reward flyer saying that Sophie left home around 12:45 a.m. when we have her walking down the street at 11:25 p.m.? I'm annoyed. I told you I warned you. Next, you guys, I hate to say it because I'm a big John Walsh fan, but they messed up pretty big in their episode about Sophie. Now, to be fair, this did come from the former detective on the case. Her name is Jennifer. But she tells them that Leonard called John Mobley at 5 a.m. on May 20th. That's when Sophie's phone was still pinging at the apartment complex. And they ask her again, can you confirm that it was between this around 3 a.m. timeline to 9 a.m. when the phone was last active? And she again says yes. So this made people go crazy, right? That Leonard supposedly called John Mobley while Sophie's phone was still there, which would obviously change a lot in this case. But after this episode aired, a spokeswoman at the Fort Lauderdale Police Department contacted the media, the Sun-Sentinel, to say that this wasn't accurate. That's where we got the information you heard in this episode. She explained that there was a phone call, but it was at 5:17 a.m. on May 23rd, 3 days after Sophie went missing. And Sergeant Geiger did reiterate this again when he went on Dateline Missing in America. That's a pretty big screw up. And again, I'm not putting it all on the show, but that paints a totally different story here. And if somebody only saw that episode, they might be led to believe something that just isn't true. But I'm going to move on to the hero of this episode. It's Aunt Kirsten, family contact, dealing with the media, starting the Sophie's Light Foundation. I mean, that's not easy to do, and it's a really amazing effort. Of course, I think it goes without saying that her whole family, usually in these episodes, I like to give a shout out to the family. And if you want to learn more about the emotional impact, the interviews with Patrick, the pictures with Patrick in Sophie's room are just devastating. But let's go on to our segment of hope. This is from WISN 12 News from journalist Stephen Kahn, and this is from June 30th, 2026. The article explains that Joniah Walker was found safe after being missing for nearly 4 years. She was only 15 when she disappeared from Milwaukee on June 23rd, 2022. Her mom said that basically Joniah left home and never returned. And this is another case where there was video footage. Basically, it showed her walking near East Reservoir Avenue and North Hubbard Street carrying a large backpack. Now, we don't have all the details. Again, this was a minor when this happened. But the Milwaukee police have confirmed that she's been found safe. It looks like she was found on May 25th, 2026. And by late July 2026, authorities allege that Joniah had been lured online as a minor and held in Virginia. And luckily that a man had been charged. I'm not going to lie, I had to take a break to compose myself, and also I wanted to know more, so I went over to another article. This is from 5 Chicago. So apparently this man had basically had her take an Uber from Milwaukee to Chicago, and she'd been communicating with this man for several years. And I really want to point out here that it was her family who got this last video of her. In this article, the relative's not named. It just says one relative said, but they say, quote, "Why didn't the police knock on people's doors? Like, everybody on that block has a Ring camera. We got the videos, not the police." End quote. Another person said, again, none of the relatives are named, they say, quote, "No one interviewed me. No one sat down. It was us versus the police stations with a glass between us." End quote. So we have some more heroes of this episode, this family, for doing what the police wouldn't. It is so frustrating to see that, because families, 1, aren't trained to do these things like the police. 2, they aren't paid to do these things like the police. And 3, they have enough on their plate when their loved ones go missing. It infuriates me. That is basic police work when a child goes missing, going door to door, checking for surveillance cameras. That is basic police work. Now, while I'm angry, let's talk about the guy, right? It's 37-year-old Owen Anderson, for everybody listening. And for what it's worth as it relates to Sophie's case, right? It looks like this guy did send her a burner phone to use. He then took it and threw it in a trash can. It looks like he's being charged with kidnapping and child abduction charges, but that's about it, despite it seems like she experienced some horrific things that I don't want to repeat here. And for some reason, they're not considering sex trafficking, it seems. It looks like Milwaukee police officer Jamie Surmala told NBC, quote, "I can assure you we have no reason to believe that she was involved in human trafficking," end quote. But I'm going to be totally honest, I don't know that I trust the police in this case. Sorry, that was a bit of emotional roller coaster. The one article I found was is great. She was, brought home, amazing, which is an amazing thing. But I wanted that extra context, and I'm so glad that NBC went into it, because we have to keep calling out these failures if we want to bring these kids home. But of course, I thought that this made an excellent segment of hope for this particular case, because it shows that kids who are lured, kids who leave home, whatever the case may be, that sometimes they are found alive. But, as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time.
Hey, I've got the campaign brief ready, built from last quarter's data and the competitive landscape.
Approved. Oh, agents, where would we be without you?
Somewhere with a lot more tabs open.
Create your first Monday agent in minutes at monday.com.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.